Hello everyone, I'm Professor Plank. I respond to various theological and ideological questions and claims from a rationalistic and naturalistic approach in an effort to give and explain the opposite viewpoint and help to balance the conversation. Before we get into today's video, a special shout out to my most recent super thankers, Captain Subs, SBN WNC, Shovelhead Steve 1172, Urgin Germand 1237, Banana Slug 1951, Kenneth Miller 6458, and James Lamica. Thank you all for your support. You are the rational ravioli helping to make my irreligious Italian eatery a success. Thank you very much for helping me to continue to do what I do. And if you like what you see in this video and would like to help out the channel, make sure to subscribe, click the bell so you'll always be notified when new content comes out. And of course, like this video, maybe pop in a comment. All of that goes a long way towards pleasing our AI overlord who holds the fate of us all in its cold digital hands, the YouTube algorithm, keeping my channel motoring along. Now on to today's video.
Now I want to tell you about one liability in, say, the burden of proof. It's a burden of proof trick where someone is trying to reverse the burden of proof on you. I call it the Professors Ploy.
You're talking to me? Well, who the hell else are you talking? You talking to me?
What? The Professor's Ploy? Is this Greg Koukl calling me out? I mean, I know I'm not the only counter-apologist with the title of Professor, and this video is a few years old at this point, but I can't help but feel a little bit targeted. So today we're going to be hearing from Stand to Reason's very own Greg Koukl. Now, Greg's evangelizing modus operandi is to turn every theistic conversation with a non-believer into an interrogation. He basically goes on the rhetorical offensive and bombards the other person with a barrage of questions to push them where he wants them to go. Now, this is a fairly common tactic, and it can and is often utilized by both sides of the aisle, but not all question-heavy approaches are the same. Many times, a person directing lots of questions at their philosophical opponent is literally just seeking to understand them better, or sometimes to get them to better understand their own thought processes and standpoints, like you get from something like street epistemology. But there is a major difference between something like that and what Greg generally does. Because Greg is not interested in getting to know his conversational partners better. He doesn't really care about why they think what they do. His questions are meant to specifically maneuver the other person right where he wants them to go. His questions aren't about understanding, they're manipulations. And today we're going to see just how manipulative and intellectually dishonest Greg's rhetorical tactics are. So let's get into what Greg classifies as the Professor's Ploy.
So when you consider using the tactical game plan, which I've outlined very thoroughly in the book Tactics, a Game Plan for Discussing Your Christian Convictions, there are three basic steps. One is to gather information by asking the question, what do you mean by that? The other one is to reverse the burden of proof by asking the question, how did you come to that conclusion? And the third step is to make your own point using questions.
So as you can see, Greg has a very specific strategy. A game plan carefully constructed to be maximally effective at evangelizing. Not designed to have an open and honest conversation with someone of differing beliefs. He's employing strategies like reversing the burden of proof, something theists have been trying to do and failing at with atheists for as long as these kinds of debates have existed. And his first step of gathering information is a fundamentally dishonest one, because he's only doing that in order to have information he can use against the non-believer.
Do you think that people who commit moral crimes ought to be punished? In other words, do people who do bad things, should they pay for them? And he said, well, since I'm a prosecuting attorney, yeah.
This kind of question is not about gaining a greater understanding of the person he's talking to. It's about being able to use that information later on to try to force them into a tacit agreement with the idea of hell, in this case, based on their earlier claim to believe in punishment for the guilty. So Greg's information gathering is akin to a spy or intelligence agent gathering intel to use against someone later more than to understand the thoughts of a fellow human being. And once he's got that weaponized information about his opponent, and once he has attempted to reverse the burden of proof, putting the onus on the other person to prove the validity of their disagreement, as if that was ever a necessary thing, then he's ready to make his own preconceived, pre-assumed point. Once he's walked you into the rhetorical traps he set for you, set you up, so to speak, he's ready to knock you down. It's a really scummy way to approach a conversation that should be about the free and open exchange of ideas.
Now I want to tell you about one liability in, say, the burden of proof. It's a burden of proof trick where someone is trying to reverse the burden of proof on you.
Wait. When someone is trying to reverse the burden of proof onto you? That implies that the burden of proof is originally on the non-believer. That the person rejecting the claim is obligated to prove their non-acceptance of it. Greg, we atheists aren't trying to reverse the burden of proof. We don't have it to begin with. We never did. We're under no obligation to prove you or your claims wrong. You already have the burden of proof. It begins on you. Right from the jump, you are the one who's obligated to defend your position. Because you're the one making a claim to begin with. You're out there saying not only that God exists, but he exists in the exact form of the Christian God, professed and attested to in the Bible and by the wider Christian faith and church that you believe in. You are obligated to defend that assertion. To say that we non-believers have the burden of proof to begin with is to say that your theistic belief is the baseline. It's the default position. That Christianity should be accepted axiomatically, and that any rejection of that position needs to be proven. Well, no, that's not how it works. You are making a biblical claim. You are positing a complex, supernatural, metaphysical reality. You are obligated to defend that position. The burden of proof lies squarely on you, as it always has.
I call it the Professors Ploy because professors like to use this. You go to class and you have a professor that is bent on destroying your own convictions. And so they're going to go after Christianity as often as they can in the class.
Oh, I think I heard my mating call.
As an atheist professor, I can say with certainty and from personal experience that
Everything that guy just said is bullshit. Thank you.
I have never brought my atheism into the classroom, because it has no place there. If it has nothing to do with the class material, then it has no business being brought to the class discussion. Apologists just love this narrative of the God is dead style college professor who's out to destroy their students' theistic belief at all costs.
And Christianity is the worst virus of all. You just want to ensnare them in your primitive superstition.
Yes, I hate God. All I have for him is hate.
But this is just a common myth to play into the Christian persecution narrative. Oh, we're Christians and everyone hates us for it. They're trying to turn our kids atheists in school, firing us for wearing crucifixes at our jobs, tearing down our manger displays at Christmas time, not to mention harassing us if we dare wish someone a Merry Christmas. We're all so deeply persecuted. It's all a fat load of unsubstantiated BS. Atheist professors aren't trying to turn your students atheists or attack their Christian convictions. This may be anecdotal, but a few semesters ago, in a public speaking class I was teaching, I had a student choose to craft their persuasive speech with the topic being reasons to believe God exists. They had no idea I, the professor who would be grading them, was an atheist, because I don't bring my atheism into the classroom. They cited arguments from the likes of Ray Comfort and Frank Turek, and I highly disagreed with everything they said. I sat there rolling my eyes and stifling groans with everything they said, but you know what? They ended up getting an A on the assignment, because the assignment was about putting together a properly formatted speech, to have a clear thesis and offer support for their arguments with properly cited sources, and to utilize good, effective verbal and nonverbal delivery skills. And the student achieved all of those things. Whether or not their arguments were convincing was not a factor of their grade. It wasn't my place to try to knock down their religious convictions. It was my place to teach them proper presentation techniques and public speaking skills. And any professor worth their salt will also keep to the material and the overall point of the specific class they're teaching. The only classes where any kind of theistic discussion should be part of the lesson plan are religious studies classes or philosophy classes, where exploration of religious belief and comparative theology is the literal point of the class. And if you don't want your specific spiritual convictions questioned, then maybe don't take a class where that is the literal point of it. And if you do take such a class, it isn't that the professor's trying to go after Christianity as often as they can. They're challenging what is likely most people's preconceived ideas in order to help them understand why they believe the things they do, and get them to think about those beliefs on a little deeper level than perhaps they ever have before. Because that's what a comparative theology class is all about. Now, if you have a professor who's doing this during a composition class, and they're stopping in the middle of a lesson on how to conjugate your verbs in order to yell at the student who came in wearing a John 3:16 shirt, then go to the student affairs department and file a complaint against that professor. Because religious discrimination is still against the law, even on college campuses.
Some Christians may not be comfortable with that. They're in the class and they want to go after the professor who's saying the Bible's just a bunch of fables or something like that. I think this is right-hearted but wrong-headed, okay? I know their heart's in the right place, but I think it's a big mistake because it violates a basic rule of engagement, which is this: you never make a frontal assault on a superior force in an entrenched position.
Now, a bit earlier, when I was accusing Greg of being a spy and seeking information in order to weaponize it against his opponent, and I was using that kind of rhetoric, positioning his tactics as akin to warfare, well, I felt I might have been going a bit too hard. That maybe I was overstating things and positioning Greg as a bit more antagonistic than necessary, or likening his strategy to battle plans might be unfair of me. But, well, he does it his own damn self. He thinks of theistic conversations as a war, which means he sees non-believers as an enemy in order to be vanquished. He even employed animators to make a nifty little cartoon to show just how much he thinks of his evangelizing as a war. At no point in this did he ever have a moment of reflection and go, perhaps this isn't the best way to get my point across.
The man with the microphone's going to win. You're outgunned at that point. However, I'm not saying break off the engagement. I think you can still be effective if you use your tactics. Okay, so what would that look like? I don't know if the professor was saying that the Bible's a bunch of fables. Based on what you know now about the tactical game plan, what question might come to mind that you could raise your hand and ask? How about, what do you mean by that?
What do you mean, what do I mean by that? What part of that statement was unclear to you? If someone says that the Bible is a bunch of fables, which word in that statement are you having trouble with? Is it fables? A fable would be a fictional story that conveys a message. The Bible clearly conveys a message. Lots of them, in fact. And any non-believer is going to be of the position that much of the Bible is fictional. Thus, a collection of largely fictional stories meant to convey a message. Hence, fables. Why did this need to be explained?
Is that the kind of question a student should ask? Sure. Is that a confrontation? No. You're just getting information. So he's going to explain in more detail what he means by the Bible's full of fables, okay? Now he's done explaining that. I don't know what other question might come to mind in light of the tactical game plan that you can ask at this point. Now, how did you come to that conclusion?
Because donkeys don't talk. Homo sapiens came about through evolution, not being formed out of dirt and rib in a garden. Language didn't diverge because of a magical curse put upon people who were building a tower. Humanity in its entirety is not descendant from one family of people who stepped off an ark a few thousand years ago, which would make all of us the product of rampant incest. These and many other things attested to in the Bible are factually incorrect, therefore fictional, but are used to convey various messages by the religion, hence fables.
Okay. Again, it's the kind of question that a student should be asking. There's no power play here. However, the professor may figure out what's going on. And he's going to say to you, well, you must be one of those Christians who believes the Bible's the Word of God.
Boy, again, such a straw man of the education system. Any professor who would do that, who would openly mock a student in the classroom in front of all the other students, or even in a private meeting behind closed doors, openly mocking a student is beyond the pale and they should be reported. We aren't there to make fun of our students, nor are we there to try to knock down their beliefs. Formal education is about teaching students how to think, not teaching them what to think. That's what religion is all about, not education. That's what you do, Greg. That's your profession. Stop projecting it onto mine.
Okay, he'll say, I got a couple of minutes. Why don't you stand up and explain to the rest of the class why you think the Bible is not a bunch of fables, but is actually the Word of God. Okay, now what has the professor just done? You probably figured it out. He's reversed the burden of proof. It's on the student now.
Well, again, no decent professor would put a student on the spot like this unless they were a terrible professor who should be removed from the classroom. But in point of fact, anyone in a religious debate doing this would not be reversing the burden of proof. They would be putting it where it belongs. If your claim is that the Bible is factually accurate and that God exists, and that the Bible is the unabridged word of that God, then you do have the burden of proof. Now, to be fair, the person claiming that the Bible is a bunch of fables also has a burden of proof, because they too are making a claim, although it's a fairly light claim. It's basically a rejection of the claims of the Bible. But it is a little more than that, because it is a claim that the Bible is specifically wrong. So there is a bit of a burden of proof with that, but it's a relatively easy burden of proof to meet, as I did just a minute ago. Donkeys don't talk. We aren't the product of Noah's family's incest. There's lots of things that the Bible has claimed that have been proven factually inaccurate, but still convey a message. So they qualify as fables. If it's your position that they are actually true, then you have adopted a burden of proof, because that is a claim. Claiming that your religious beliefs and the claims of the Bible are true demands a burden of proof. You don't get to claim that it's a reversal of the burden of proof. It's not. It's just placing it squarely where it belongs.
Now, why is that an illicit move here? It's because the student, the Christian, has not made any claim. He's just asked questions.
No. If your position is that the Bible is the Word of God, then you do have a burden of proof. Now, even in your entirely fictitious, doesn't actually happen in the classroom scenario, the professor called out the position of the student.
However, the professor may figure out what's going on. And he's going to say to you, well, you must be one of those Christians who believes the Bible's the Word of God.
Now, if the student doesn't believe that, then they could just deny what the professor's claiming. They can just say that they don't necessarily believe the Bible is true, and they were just wondering how the professor got to that notion. Then the Christian wouldn't have any burden of proof. But if the Christian is going to be honest, they have to affirm that they believe in the Bible, and that they were disagreeing with the atheist, not because they simply didn't accept their claim, but because they actively believe the opposite. And if that's the case, then they indeed have a burden of proof. As a Christian trying to push Christian ideology, you don't get out of it by just constantly asking manipulative questions. And besides, it would be really easy for the atheist to put the Christian into their own claims. Because, in case you didn't know, we can ask questions too. So if you would ask, how did you come to that conclusion that the Bible is full of fables, I could give my explanation about the proven falsities of the Bible, and then tack on to that, do you disagree with the idea that there are fictional stories in the Bible? And if so, why? And if you or any other Christian was to be honest, you would have to affirm the claim that the Bible is true, at which point you have now adopted a burden of proof.
Right? Therefore, the student, the Christian, bears no burden of proof, but the professor is pushing it on him, saying, you disprove me. That's the Professors Ploy.
This is actually hilarious in light of the fact that this is exactly what Christians like Greg do all the time. To every atheist they speak to, they always attempt to flip the burden of proof and insist that it's the non-believer who needs to disprove Christianity, as if that should be the default way that things should be. You're claiming Christianity, Greg. That means you have a burden of proof. And no fictional scenario about shitty professors who berate their students in open class where religion should never be discussed in the first place is going to change that. You know, I would love to have an encounter with Greg Koukl or some Christian who is poised to use Greg's tactics in a religious discussion. Because Greg acts like he's the only one who has this idea of asking questions and more questions. The second it becomes apparent that the apologist is just on this kick of trying to assault you with questions and put you on the spot for being responsible for answering everything they say, it's fairly easy to just Uno reverse that shit and do it yourself. The Bible is a bunch of fables. Well, what do you mean by that? What part of that statement are you having trouble with? Are you saying that you don't think the Bible is true? I am. Are you saying that the Bible is true? Well, I'm just wondering how you came to that conclusion. The Bible is full of a bunch of claims that I have not been convinced of their accuracy. Do you believe that they are accurate? Well, I'm a Christian, so yes, I believe the Bible is correct. Then you need to prove that. Bingo bango, burden of proof is now squarely where it belongs. On the Christian making the claim of Christianity's accuracy, who is just trying to hide behind a barrage of questions to avoid having to give reasons for their belief. Which you shouldn't be attempting to do in the first place, Greg. After all, Peter 3:15 says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. Not only are you trying to dodge that responsibility, which goes directly against the biblical edict, Greg, but I don't detect even a hint of respect from you, based on your dishonest, manipulative tactics. So that is where we will leave Greg Koukl for today. Don't forget to like this video, comment, and subscribe so you'll always be notified when a new video comes out. Until next time, I'm Professor Plink, reminding you to keep striving for greater understanding. It's the best way to get wherever you want to go.